Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphan Last, aka Skylar Madison, and today I'm going to be working on a piece of Star Wars fan art. Now, I've been told that the Star Destroyer looks a little bit odd, but it's just the curvilinear effect. This is a panoramic image, basically. So you're looking at more than 180 degrees worth of a viewing angle. And if the image were to have been printed, hung on a wall, and you stood at the intended distance away from the image where you had to actually turn your head to see everything, the Star Destroyer doesn't look as weird as it would if you're standing way back and getting more of a 180 degrees worth of viewing angle in just one instant. And I made sure to put quite a bit of detail into the image to where someone might actually want to stand close to the image as well. Having the Star Destroyer come towards the viewer and then going away from the viewer seemed like a really compelling way to communicate the opening scene of A New Hope, where you get a very good idea just as to how large, how big a Star Destroyer is. And when drawing a panoramic image, I don't know what it is, but I like the distortion that takes place, and I really see no reason to shy away from it. The original sketch that this image is based on is from my sketchbook, so everything in this image originated from me and the creative work that I do with my hands. But to be honest, I really didn't use the sketch from my sketchbook that much. I wound up using a bunch of references and adjusting a few proportions to fit a touch better than what I initially sketched inside of my sketchbook. Now, the voiceover in this video is going to be a little bit different than most of my videos because I'm going to take a moment to kind of geek out and talk about my thoughts on Star Wars rather than going into depth about talking about what's going on the screen. Now, Star Wars was a huge part of my childhood. When I was about 11 or 12 years old, they were starting to come out with the Star Wars films again and showing them in theaters, and then the special editions started to come out and they showed up in theaters again. It was an awesome time to be a Star Wars fan. And to me, it just seems like the initial audiences, plural audiences, of Star Wars has now grown up, ranging from stinking old to full adult. And though there are still fans of Star Wars that are teenaged, young adults, and such like that, they are the minority of the fans of Star Wars. This is what happens when you release films such drastic distances of time apart from one another. So in order for a franchise to survive, it needs to grow up with the audience. Otherwise, you just wind up with something stupid like Metal Gear, or this new retcon trilogy in the Star Wars franchise that Disney made, this horrible abomination. I think that for Disney to still be saying that Star Wars is for kids is a mismanagement of the intellectual property. By all means, make it family friendly with the same amount of edge as the originals, and by that I mean Obi-Wan chopped off someone's bloody arm and Leia ran around with a metal bikini for a short period of time. But I really wish Disney would stop fooling themselves into thinking Star Wars is for children when the only people that actually remember Star Wars tend to range from ages 20 and above. The people that are actually fond and loving towards Star Wars, 20 and above. George Lucas, waiting 40 years to tell his whole story and failing to finish was kind of a mistake. Granted, he took a long break between the originals to the prequels because he needed to be there for his infant child and raise her. And I can respect that. And then after the prequels, he got so much fan backlash that he didn't want to keep at it anymore. And I don't think he ever really considered himself a director, just more so considered himself more of an editor. And regardless of how unwatchable I feel the prequels are, it's undeniable that the prequels revolutionized the industry every bit as much as the original Star Wars films, because although the actual moment-by-moment storytelling inside of the prequels, which can be summed up with
walking and talking,
is complete and total garbage in the prequels, George Lucas introduced new forms of digital editing that no one had ever seen before, and I can respect that. I only wish that there were script doctors that could have read over the scripts for the prequels and fixed it before George Lucas just decided to start filming. But that's all after the fact sort of reasoning going on there. And then Disney got their hands on Star Wars, and though I don't feel Star Wars is completely dead, and I have hope that The Mandalorian and the Obi-Wan TV series might be able to be the true continuing legacy of Star Wars, I just have have to call a spade a spade. This new trilogy completed
the Palpatine Saga.
Disney insists on calling it the Skywalker Saga, but how exactly? After having seen this dumpster fire of a retcon trilogy that Kathleen Kennedy, J.J. Abrams, and Rian Johnson hath wrought, it occurs to me that Star Wars now is an epic covering the rise of Palpatine, the subsequent enslavement of the Skywalker line, a setback in total conquest of the galaxy through the Skywalkers, and a final triumph over the Skywalker name and the galaxy with the addition of creating an heir to not only inherit everything that the Palpatines created, but also the laurels and heroic deeds of the Skywalker family by cutting them off into extinction and appropriating their name. Though the moment-to-moment storytelling can be said to be a little bit more entertaining than just walking and talking in the prequels when compared to this new retcon trilogy, the writing was worse than the prequels in many ways, and let me go ahead and just kind of describe this a little bit. Character arcs are completely absent in the retcon trilogy, and I call it the retcon trilogy because I don't accept episodes 7, 8, and 9 part of Star Wars, and I'll get into describing why. Rey is perfect from the beginning, and no amount of saying the
Force Dyad or Palpatine
will ever justify her being a Mary Sue. She is a horrible character who, although did good things, every time she found adversity, she instantly knew everything she needed to know in order to get through the situation, with no prior content to show she'd have those skills at all. Oh look, a spaceship.
I think I'll fly it like a pro.
Oh, the ship is damaged?
I think I'll fix it and give Han Solo tips on how to fix it. Never mind the fact that he'd know the ship better, like an extension of himself.
Oh, it only took Ezra Bridger 2 or 3 seasons in order to learn how to force influence someone, but
Not Rey. It only took her 3 failed attempts to strike gold.
the idea that it only took 3 tries for her to overcome another person's mind is ridiculous, and I've had people defend that she's not a Mary Sue because of those failed 3 attempts, and it reeks of desperation, to be honest. Finn went from being a traumatized stormtrooper, an interesting character, to just being that funny guy who yells
Ray! Ray! Ray!
all the time. Poe starts off with a narrative that comes off of the opening scroll as the best pilot in the galaxy and ends on that exact same note. Evidently, he did some shady things at one point in time in his life, but too little too late and way too rushed. All of the droids, including BB-8, are poorly used in the retcon trilogy. Did any of the new people working on this trilogy think that maybe R2-D2 and C-3PO went with the main characters on missions because they were every bit as helpful as any other part of the crew in their own way? I mean, they're just Christmas decorations in these new movies. Force ghosts now have physical destructive powers and can wield physical objects, which gets me to wonder, why would you send your living out to fight your battles when the dead could do it more effectively without a single loss of life on your side of the battle? After decades of having been looking up to Han Solo, Leia, and Luke after the Return of the Jedi, Han is a deadbeat dad who left his wife and kid to resume being a shady smuggler. Who cares about all that respectability, right? Am I right? I mean, wouldn't you do that too? Leia raised her son so poorly that he became yet another Darth Vader with the exact same redemption arc as Darth Vader that no one wanted to see again. Although Luke's family ties with his father led him to risk possibly even gambling away the fate of the entire rebellion, the fate of the galaxy, in order to try and turn his father to the light, and succeeded, Luke's faith wavered because he noticed that his nephew wasn't perfect, so he tried to kill him, and generally failed to restore the Jedi Order and became a dismal failure hobo that likes to tell people to get off his lawn. After years of looking up to these characters, this is who they wind up being. I'm sorry, I just completely reject the very notion of any of that. These are our heroes, and Disney wants us to believe that their actions lead to everything that destroyed the New Republic in the new retcon trilogy. I just don't believe that. That not even possible. It's not within their character. None of this sounds like these characters. They are incapable of being such dismal losers. I don't care what Disney writes in the script. My suspension of disbelief has just been completely removed, and all that remains remains is disbelief. I just don't believe a single thing in this new trilogy. Anakin's quest was to find the Force power to obtain immortality, not just for himself, but for the love of his life, Padme, even if it means delving headfirst into the dark side of the Force. And when he wound up being the instrument of Padme's eventual death, the love of his life, he's spent the rest of his life trying to find ways to bring her back to life again, only to find his son and daughter were Padme's legacy, and sacrificed himself to keep what remaining embers of her in the galaxy alive. Anakin, the product of a virgin birth, the messiah of the Star Wars galaxy, the most powerful Force user to ever exist, sought the power of eternal life and the ability to bring someone back to life, and never found it. And yet somehow an untrained Rey and a poorly trained Kylo Ren who gets his butt kicked constantly by an untrained Rey somehow have those powers intuitively. I've had people say,
Oh, but it's in their blood.
but how? I mean, it's not in the Skywalker bloodline because Anakin never found it, and neither did Luke. And Darth Plagueis had that power, not Palpatine. Immortality and necromancy are not powers that are in the Skywalker or Palpatine bloodlines in any way, shape, or form. Honestly, any number of the fan theories that cropped up from The Force Awakens drawn from a hat would have been better than what we got. Granted, Disney did the best that they could with the worst ideas known to man that they set off with from The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. But I don't see any reason to give it a pass. Why would you set off with the worst ideas humanly possible to continue a story that was concluded with such a pretty bow, only to open that bow, poop in the box while you're screaming,
It's figgy pudding!
and then tie an amateur granny knot at the end and hand it off as if anyone wants it now? Why would you do that? And let's take a moment to talk about the Force. The Force is described by Obi-Wan inside of A New Hope as an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, and binds the galaxy together. Later on, or earlier on, depending on what your perspective is, Qui-Gon Jinn inside of The Phantom Menace described the Force as midichlorians, which are microscopic life forms that reside within all living cells, and we are symbionts with them. Life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without midichlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. That is Star Wars canon. So, seeing as the Force is something that resides in all living things, it's safe to say that the Force was unbalanced in the prequels and inside of the originals because all life was either starting to be repressed by the formation of the Empire and then eventually brought into a state of constant fear under the continued rule of the Empire. The overwhelming number of living things were in constant fear because the Force is in all living things. That fear in all living things causing imbalance to the Force. You channel the light side with emotions like compassion, hope, and inner peace and such like that. And you can channel the dark side with emotions like pain, hate, anger, fear. All life feeling pain, anger, hate, and fear constantly under the Empire. That is where the imbalance was inside of the original trilogy and the prequels. Yet Disney's new addition to the narrative of how the Force works is, as Snoke puts it, Kylo Ren is darkness rising and Rey is light to meet it. So for every dark side user, a light side user is born to balance the Force.
This is stupid.
Now, this is new to Star Wars, and it's a horrible idea. Under this new balancing system, it would be far more likely that the light side balance would have been something like a Loth wolf. If you've seen Star Wars Rebels, you know what I'm talking about. It could have been any other sort of animal with an extraordinary adeptness at using the Force. I guess we just lucked out that it was another human Force user, Mary Sue, I guess. Even though the odds are extraordinarily against that happening. When Snoke was describing how the Force balances itself, which I don't think it's ever been a self-balancing thing, I kind of felt like I was watching Kung Pao when the Kung Fu master mentions how he's training one of his students wrong as a joke, instructing him to run around shirtless, showing off his brown nipples, and wearing squeaky shoes wherever he goes. And I thought that Mary Sue Ray won't fall for it, but Kylo Ren is that character from Kung Pao, the guy who gets his butt kicked and then brags about how he's the victor for nonsensical reasons because he was trained wrong. I mean, that's Kylo Ren. He's that idiot character from Kung Pao. I reject the self-balancing force that Disney has posed in this retcon trilogy, because if we go by the old definition of the Force, Anakin still remains the Messiah of the galaxy by the end of this new retcon trilogy. And this new retcon trilogy is just the Force in a state of shock, if we go by the old definition of the Force. The First Order didn't even have enough time to bring fear to all life, whereas the Empire was around for at least something like 18 to 20 years, okay? Even longer than that if you count its transition over to becoming an empire with the separatists and all that. Whereas with this new Disney definition of the Force, Anakin's Messiah status is stripped away and handed off to Mary Sue Ray Palpatine Identity Politic Usurper Skywalker. It's a long name, but I find you have to call her by her full name, otherwise people don't know who she truly is. And if that Messiah status is handed off to Rey, then it devalues the prequels and there's really no reason to even watch them. Disney has made the Force this weird Deus Ex Machina. The image of Kylo Ren and Rey having a tug of war with a spaceship in flight is burned into my mind as one of the stupidest moments in Star Wars history, but definitely not the stupidest, and all of the worst moments of Star Wars history is earned 100% by Disney. Yes, the prequels were bad, nearly unwatchable garbage, but they didn't outright ruin the way the Force works. But the retcon trilogy does. I was actually glad that The Force Unleashed was taken out of canon, because there's no way a Force user can pull an entire gigantic Star Destroyer around, only to get Rey and Kylo Ren having a tug-of-war with a spaceship later on. Why even bother making The Force Unleashed non-canon if you're just going to put the worst parts of it back into Star Wars? Seriously. And I've had a lot of people ask me what I would have rather had Disney do. And I've had people even say that they'd hate to see what someone like me would have done with Star Wars. Well, personally, if I had been handed the reins and episodes 7, 8, and 9 hadn't been made yet, I'd use George Lucas's story treatments and try and find ways of both telling George Lucas's story as well as bring as much of the Star Wars Legends or expanded universe into being canon as possible. As much as possible. In my mind, if the expanded universe is better than any of the new fresh ideas that any of the writers are coming up with right now, why not use the existing sequel material that's existed ever since the 1990s from the expanded universe? You know, the content that the fans have already accepted as being Star Wars? Some of the best authors out there with best-selling awards and respectable credentials worked on the expanded universe. Kathleen Kennedy can pretend as if there's no comic books and novels in the Star Wars universe all she wants, but the facts tell a very different story. And any of the inconsistencies inside of the expanded universe could be addressed and fixed with a second go-around with Disney at the helm, if they were to have gone that route. I don't have any problem with Force Skyping or Force healing and etc. These things existed inside of the expanded universe lore, but under a different context. The definition of the Force wasn't ruined with the Disney narrative. The fans accepted these powers under specific conditions that were laid out inside of the expanded universe. If doing what I suggest would mean recasting younger actors like Anthony Gruber as a young Han Solo, who's already played a young Harrison Ford before and was actually very convincing, and find some other actors in order to play Luke, Leia, and etc., then I'd be okay with that, and I think the fans would be okay with that too. But some people might raise an argument at this point and mention how Han Solo, the Han Solo film, it flopped because no one can play Han Solo but Harrison Ford, even though Harrison Ford kind of hates the character and kind of hates Star Wars. I disagree. I think people didn't go watch that movie primarily because they already established that Han Solo is a deadbeat who shirked his respectable status, regressed back into crime, left his wife, and raised his son to hate him so much that his son jabbed a lightsaber right through Han Solo's guts and killed him. And because The Last Jedi made Luke Skywalker into an angry, resentful hobo, and, you know, we just didn't want to see Disney taking another diarrhea dump over our favorite characters anymore. That's why people didn't watch the Han Solo movie, and I don't know why more people aren't making this point here on YouTube with an entire channel centered on Star Wars. Why am I the only person that's saying this? It also didn't help that major reshoots were done on that movie, the Han Solo movie, and the original directors were fired, and besides, they picked the wrong actor to play young Han Solo, Anthony Gruber. Check him out. There's a card in the upper right corner of the screen right now. Check him out. But now that there's an abysmal episode 7, 8, and 9, how would I personally fix Star Wars if I were in a position to do so? Well, The Mandalorian showcased the dark saber, okay, which was featured inside of the Clone Wars, but more importantly, Star Wars Rebels, which had a character called Ezra Bridger. I would like to see Ezra Bridger come back somehow, but in a live action form in The Mandalorian. Conclude whatever it is that happened at the end of Star Wars Rebels. Give us Ezra Bridger back again, because it would also give The Mandalorian someone to hand off Baby Yoda to. But dear God, if they do make a live action Ezra Bridger, don't give him blue hair. There's an episode of Star Wars Rebels where Ezra Bridger walks into a Jedi temple and sees doorways that enter into different moments in time into different places. And Ezra Bridger actually saves Anakin's Padawan by pulling her into the temple from one of those doors. So in a way, he brought her back to life. And if there ever were another temple that serves a similar sort of purpose, I would hope that some efforts could be put into effect to reboot episodes 7, 8, and 9 from that moment on, using a Jedi temple like this. So in a way, time travel does exist inside of the Star Wars universe, but I would never want to go full-on time travel. Now, if this idea sounds completely ridiculous to some people, which I can understand some people might not like this idea, the other option would be to completely reboot everything in order to fix it. I just think that it would be better if Ezra Bridger were to appear to a younger actor playing Luke Skywalker before Luke decides to attack Ben Solo and go full hobo and instructs Luke not to go full Jephthah on Ben Solo. Do not try to kill Ben Solo. And maybe Ezra Bridger could appear to Han Solo and Leia and give some sort of advice from one of these doors about Palpatine's return. And once Ezra would walk out of the Jedi Temple inside of the Mandalorian TV show, the shape of the galaxy would be very different than it was when he entered the temple initially. That's what I think should happen. This would allow Star Wars to start tying into the expanded universe. Keep in mind that Palpatine did make a return in the expanded universe. It was just accepted, even by the modern fans, because the Force wasn't this one-to-one ratio self-balancing device between light side and dark side users. And this would give us the opportunity to see a Luke Skywalker turn to the dark side for a while, just like inside of the expanded universe. A really interesting narrative there. We could see Leia train to become a Jedi, maybe have another child so that although Ben Solo and this new child wouldn't be twins, we could have something that could tie it all back into what the fans have already accepted as Star Wars in one way or another as Star Wars sequels. And the Wills of the Force seems to be the narrative that George Lucas wanted the sequel trilogy to focus on. And ultimately, I feel the creator of the original narrative needs to be respected. And I think it'd be interesting if The Mandalorian with Ezra Bridger took a direction into revealing that aspect of the story treatments that George Lucas supplied for Disney. But that's all just kind of a fantasy of mine, but more of a suggestion to Disney. But ultimately, as things currently stand, I think Disney is going to double down on this stupid retcon trilogy trilogy. But the first mention of the First Order in The Mandalorian and any subsequent Star Wars content from here on out is when I'm going to tune out instantly. The second the First Order is brought up, I'm going to tune out. The first mention of Finn, Rey, Poe, all of it. As far as I'm concerned, none of it ever happened. It's not Star Wars. It's a completely different franchise that just looks like Star Wars. I reject this new trilogy in every way. It ruins my favorite characters. It ruins Anakin. It ruins the Force. It ruins everything Star Wars. So my hope is that Disney never tries to tie in anything to this new retcon trilogy in any way, shape, or form. I don't want to know how the First Order came into being because I don't care. The First Order is stupid, and there's no way to make any of this crap appealing even with retroactive writing. You can polish a petrified turd all you want, but it's still going to be a lump of petrified crap, no matter how shiny you try to polish it. Okay, Disney? Now please don't call me a member of the toxic fan base, because I'm not. It's the Reylo fans that are the toxic fan base. The people that want not just Kylo Ren and Rey to be together as a couple, but for Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver to be a couple, because that's what they supposedly should have been inside of the movies. The Reylo fans have a complete and total disconnect from reality, making people's lives a living nightmare who happen to have worked on this new retcon trilogy. Stalking cast members and stuff like that. Yeah, that's the toxic fan base, the Reylo fans. I'm part of the fan base that loves Star Wars and hopes that stupid things like Mary Poppins and the Dancing Penguins or anything even remotely like that doesn't make an appearance in Star Wars ever again. And that nothing ties into anything already in Star Wars that's comparatively as stupid. I'm that part of the fan base. And I don't believe, even for 1 second, that I'm the only one that feels this way. The Rise of Skywalker's box office dropped like 70% in its second week, 80% in its third week, and the flop of the Han Solo movie is proof enough that I'm not the only one that feels this way. Other people feel this way. I know it. So if Disney is going to double down on this stupid retcon trilogy, there's only 3 routes that they can go. They can focus on the 20-odd years after the Return of the Jedi and stop just short of the appearance of the First Order, but never mentioning it, otherwise large chunks of the audience will tune out instantly. Or they can focus on the time period during the original trilogy with new characters, or they can start focusing on the Knights of the Old Republic. But that's only if they double down on the retcon trilogy. So those are my thoughts on Star Wars right now, and you can see the image coming to a conclusion. It's looking really nice, and here's the final image, and I'm just going to pan around to kind of show approximately how far you would have to stand away from this image in order for things to look less distorted, because it's a panoramic image. I put so much love and care into this image. Like, there's so much detail here, and I love this image. It's great. It's everything that I loved about the original trilogy. But Star Wars is not just another Death Star. It's not another prop inside of the Star Wars universe. This was the golden years of Star Wars. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to get more notifications from me or have more participation with my community, feel free to follow me on Twitter or go ahead and join my Discord. A link to both is in the video description below. If you'd like to support this channel, there's an image of my mascot in the upper right corner of the screen. It leads to my Patreon, and any support would be much appreciated. If you've enjoyed this content and would like to see more, feel free to click on anything else that's appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.